The US government uses economic sanctions against Russia as a potent tool in its foreign policy tool. Could this, however, ultimately work against the US? To learn more, see this video through to the end. Many nations have worked cooperatively over the past few years to reduce their reliance on the US dollar. The economic conflict fought against Russia explains why. After Russian President Vladimir Putin recognized two breakaway republics in Ukraine and declared he would send troops there, the US imposed new economic sanctions on Russia. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, President Biden announced new sanctions. Peter Schiff recently discussed how US sanctions against Russia may short-term upset the US economy and increase inflation, but using the dollar as a weapon of war could have long-term repercussions as well. It might speed up the de-dollarization of the entire world and even put the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency in danger. The US, a superpower on the global scale, pursues an aggressive foreign policy, but the US's vast military is not the only way it projects power around the world. Additionally, it turns the US dollar into a weapon by employing its economic hedge money and privilege of being the issuer of the world's reserve currency as a carrot-and-stick foreign policy tool. The US government showers billions of dollars in foreign aid to friends. On the other hand, enemies can find themselves locked out of SWIFT, the global financial system that the US effectively controls using the dollar. The nuclear option when it comes to economic warfare. Initially, the US said it would not exclude Russia from SWIFT, but a few days later, the US, the EU, the United Kingdom, and Canada issued a joint statement announcing that selected Russian banks would be cut off from the international payment system. This will ensure that these banks are disconnected from the international financial system and harm their ability to operate globally, the statement read. Consider it a nuclear strike with a tactical element. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication, SWIFT, is an acronym. Financial institutions can use the system to send and receive transaction-related information in a safe, standardized setting. The international dollar system is made possible by SWIFT because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. SWIFT and dollar dominance give the US a great deal of leverage over other countries. The US has previously used the system as a stick. As ties between the two nations deteriorated in 2014 and 2015, the Obama administration blocked a number of Russian banks from using SWIFT. Under Trump, if China disobeyed UN sanctions on North Korea, the US threatened to lock it out of the dollar system. During a conference that was broadcasted on CNBC, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin threatened to use this economic nuclear option. A nation would be economically cut off from the rest of the world if it were completely effectively banned from SWIFT. However, there would also be effects felt by other economies. For instance, a Russian lawmaker cautioned that completely barring his nation from SWIFT would stop the flow of goods into Europe. Russia wasn't unprepared for the move, considering the history of the United States using sanctions as a tool for foreign policy. In fact, several nations that are aware that they could easily find themselves in the firing line have taken measures to reduce their reliance on the dollar and even started working to establish alternative payment systems. This applies to Iran, China, and Russia. For internal use, Russia developed its own payment system many years ago. As of September 2018, 416 Russian businesses and government agencies had signed up to use the System for Transfer of Financial Messages, SPFS, according to the Central Bank of Russia. As a way to diversify their holdings away from the dollar, an increasing number of central banks are also investing in gold. Russia was the largest central bank gold purchaser before ending the purchase program at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Between June 2019 and June 2020, the Central Bank of Russia purchased the yellow metal in an amount totaling $4.3 billion. And long before that, the Russians were purchasing gold. Beginning in March 2015, the Russia Central Bank began purchasing gold each month. Russia is the largest buyer in the world, having spent more than $40 billion over the past 5 years, amassing a war chest of gold, according to Bloomberg. In the meantime, the Russian Central Bank aggressively reduced its holdings of US Treasury bonds. Russia sold off $47.4 billion of its $96.1 billion in US Treasury bonds in April 2018 alone, accounting for nearly half of its total US debt. It's not just America's enemies who are worried about the US abusing its economic power. Her friends are also wary, as they should be. Americans' enemies aren't the only ones concerned about the US abusing its economic might. Allies are cautious as well, which is appropriate. The EU announced the opening of a special payment channel to get around US economic sanctions and facilitate trade with Iran after Donald Trump withdrew the US from the Iran nuclear deal. Federica Mogherini, the head of the EU's foreign policy, made the announcement following a meeting with the foreign ministers of Iran, China, Russia, Britain, France, and Germany. She claimed that businesses would be able to keep their oil and other business deals with Iran thanks to the new payment channel. This highlights a danger to the US economic sanctions could eventually undermine the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency in the long run. Peter Schiff warned that other countries are watching how the US handles its power as the issuer of the global reserve currency during the Russian-Ukraine war. The economic knock-on effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are going to be felt throughout Europe. While the overall economic fallout is still difficult to predict, the impact will be different for different member states. This brief takes a very first look at potential differences in exposure, focusing on direct trade links, potential costs of energy dependence on Russia, and vulnerabilities towards rising energy prices more generally. It shows that the EU member states' economic vulnerability to the Russian invasion of Ukraine is very unevenly distributed. To cushion the economic blow and ensure political unit, the EU will need to share some of the economic burden of this crisis. The uneven distribution of economic hardship among EU member states is a political issue as well as an economic one. In order to prevent some member states from being impacted much more than others, burden sharing will be necessary to ensure that Europe remains united in the months and possibly years to come in the face of the Russian aggression. But which nations will suffer the most, and why? This brief examines potential variations in exposure among member states for the very first time. It focuses on vulnerabilities to rising energy prices, as well as direct trade exposure, potential costs of energy dependence on Russia, and other related issues. This first peek at data reveals some important patterns. First, Central and Eastern European countries are especially vulnerable across a range of factors. This includes export dependence, reliance on energy imports from Russia, as well as pronounced exposure to general price hikes for energy. Second, Germany and Italy stand out as countries that are heavily dependent on Russian gas, but could also be hit by supply shortages in the automotive industries. Third, the overall effect of rising energy prices differs across member states. While it would be especially hard to stomach for poorer countries in the East with cold winters, energy-intensive economies in Northern and Western Europe would also suffer disproportionately. As a result, it is likely that the EU will need to share this burden equally to keep political unity. The economic vulnerability of the EU's member states to Russia's invasion of Ukraine is very unevenly distributed, as this preliminary analysis demonstrates. This is true of direct trade in non-energy goods with Russia, reliance on Russian energy imports, and susceptibility to rising energy prices on global markets. Keeping the 27 united in their response to Russia will be crucial in the coming months and possibly years. In order to avoid differential economic impact and prevent those member states that will be most negatively affected from leaving the united front against Putin, it will probably be necessary to share the burden in a way that takes these differences in vulnerability and economic fallout into account. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed today's video and found it interesting, then make sure to leave us a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon to be up to date with the latest content as soon as it's uploaded. Thanks for watching. See you again soon in another video.